popular impressions of the Hanoverians have rarely been that positive. George I, it is usually thought, was a dull, middle-aged man with a somewhat unsavoury past who remained closely tied to his German homeland. George II was an uncultured disciplinarian. George III was mad, and George IV a spendthrift. This problematic attitude towards the Georges was the starting point for J.H. Plum's The First Four Georges, published in 1956. In this work, Plum attempted to portray the Georges as human beings caught in exceptional circumstances, and much has been done subsequently by historians to revise attitudes to the second, third, and fourth of the Hanoverian line. George I, however, remains little known and little loved. Even Plum, who insisted he was far from a non-entity, described the king as very stupid and lacking interest in the arts. This chimed with impressions circulated in the 19th century that George was interested in England only for what it could offer him, rather than the other way around. The most enduring myth has been that he was unable to speak English, or at best spoke little. His linguistic weakness was supposedly the reason for the preferences shown to his German advisors over most English politicians, who were for the most part similarly limited in their knowledge of foreign languages. Yet, how true is it? Recent publications have certainly done nothing to question the assumption that George struggled with English. Tim Blanning insists that George was handicapped by his rudimentary knowledge of the English language, while Tracy Borman claims that this manifested itself in George's preference for easier-to-follow ballets and pantomimes. However, back in 1978, in her seminal biography of George I, Ragnald Hatton concluded that when the king arrived in England, his knowledge was not as limited or non-existent as once believed. Hatton detailed how prior to his accession, one correspondent writing to George in English flattered his command of the language, and how Robert Harley, future Earl of Oxford, writing in 1710, insisted that George possessed an English heart. Was this just the flattery of courtiers, or an indication that George had more than a smattering of English by the time he took the throne? What is the evidence for the king's supposed ignorance of his new kingdom's language? A comment made by Lady Ferrers, complaining to a correspondent in August 1714 that the new king spoke neither French nor English, and consequently would not be very good company, was certainly wide of the mark. If nothing else, there is no doubting that he spoke French. The king's confidence in his command of English may have been part of the problem. George disliked dining in public at his English court, unlike in Hanover, where he was considerably more outgoing. He also avoided addressing Parliament directly, allowing the Lord Chancellor to deliver the speech at the opening of sessions, while he looked on from the throne. By the 1720s, though, George had clearly made progress in the language. Official documents were no longer translated into French, which suggests that he was more than capable of following arguments relating to policy in English. Even if George never quite cast off his own preference for speaking French or German in private, he undoubtedly understood that for the dynasty to prosper, it was important that the following generations were not so encumbered. It's telling, though, that at private moments, George I, George II, and Prince Frederick preferred to fall back on French or German. When Prince Frederick lay dying in the spring of 1751, his last words were said to have been "Je sens la mort," the French for "I sense death." By contrast, George I's great-grandson, who succeeded as George III in 1760 owing to his father, Prince Frederick's untimely death, famously emphasised his Britishness in his first opening speech to Parliament: "I glory in the name of Britain." This, from the first of the Hanoverian kings to be born in England, undoubtedly marked a turning point for the dynasty, as it attempted to dispel the image that it was foreign.